The Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, is not designed to help kids. I know, shocking, right? It's designed instead to control that which cannot be controlled, the maddening tide of the digital circus we call the internet. The internet, for better or worse, is the place where ideas can be presented in an unfiltered, maybe even chaotic manner. In many regards, this is dangerous, from the alt-right pipeline to QAnon, to insane conspiracy theories about subterranean Aryan cities under the Arctic, or Antarctic, depending on which one you're listening to. No, really, these are real things on the internet. The internet has allowed dangerous and stupid ideas to spread like wildfire.
Do you remember the QAnon shaman? Well, that mangy old buffalo chip just got out of the halfway house recently, and it didn't take him long to get his grift rolling again.
And they laugh at me because I'm different. But all the while, I'm laughing at them because they're all the same.
Misinformation, false news reports.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use those platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Just plain dumb shit. Of course, not all of this misinformation is entirely accidental. Some of it's deliberately planted. There is evidence to suggest that Gamergate, that one, the ethics and journalism guys, that was spearheaded, it is believed, by Jeffrey Epstein, based on evidence released from the Epstein files, where he happened to meet with various figures who proved key and crucial in this movement becoming what it was. They are those who know how to manage the internet and how to get what they want out of it. But that is different from what KOSA is doing. KOSA is part of a worrying trend to censor the internet.
And we now have the Kids Online Safety Act that has been reintroduced.
And by God, it is the most vague thing I have ever read in my entire life. I am now witnessing what this truly means in full effect, and it is horrifically bad.
That's right, the online club bouncers are officially here.
And for those of us who pay attention to what has been done to schools and libraries across the country, as well as what's happened to the internet in other nations overseas, the truth cannot be any clearer. This is something we should worry about. KOSA has been in the works in some form or another for years now. After decades of various other bills like it or what have you, a version of the bill has been passed by the House and is being reviewed by the Senate.
And it's very interesting when you look at the big tech dollars that are funding the lobbying efforts.
Will this bill pass? Will the internet be rewritten? Well, it almost doesn't matter if it is passed or not, because tech has already bent the knee to the influence of KOSA and changed their policies to align with KOSA's proposed policies. Haven't you wondered why every single piece of tech now wants your ID, your face, YouTube, Discord, so many others? They want your identification to prove you're of age to protect children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
No, stop. Think of the children.
But all the information can be leaked, can't it? I mean, there's so many stories of hacks and leaks of driver's licenses, social security numbers, your credit card information leaking onto the dark web. No, this isn't like a forward into a sponsorship. I'm just being serious. That happens all the time. Even the companies Discord has worked with tend to be aligned with organizations that have had major leaks, we shall say. All of these policies involve the surrendering of your personal information, which, yeah, it's a bit of a concern. Do you want to hand your likeness over to the company that regularly leaks your IDs, or might sell your face to Elon Musk to turn into whatever it is Grok does nowadays?
This is Grok. You know Elon Musk's app basically rivaled ChatGPT.
Imagine me smirking, leaning in close in my tight little black dress, tugging the neckline down slow, teasing you with a glimpse that's got your pulse racing.
And what are with these jiggle physics? So unnecessary, but Elon knows the audience he is targeting with this.
So, but then again, it doesn't really matter because Jeffrey Epstein and his pals already have all your school photos from the past 40 years. Yes, if you're an American and you took a school photo, Jeffrey Epstein has your photo. Or did. This should terrify you. Defenders of the KOSA bill ignore all these data risks with handing your IDs over to tech companies, and instead argue that this bill will only affect material accessible to children and not material accessible to adults, even though adults have to hand in their birth certificate and firstborn son as proof that they're of age, but I digress. After all, KOSA is designed to prevent children from accessing NSFW websites that are not safe for work, and various states have passed laws restricting access to NSFW websites, and these sites are now completely inaccessible in those states, regardless of if you're of age or not. Which, by the way, here's a question: what is NSFW? Like, what does it count? Because the laws in place, including KOSA, doesn't actually offer a satisfying limitation as to what counts as NSFW work and what doesn't. I mean, you're probably thinking that nudity is a thing, right? So now nudity is banned, let's say. It's also, what else includes nudity that might be banned? Maybe Dragon Ball, the manga. I mean, there's nudity in Dragon Ball. Does that mean that Dragon Ball is now banned? You would never call Dragon Ball NSFW, but you now realize that through this vague definition of what NSFW is, you're now cutting off access to more than you thought. And if Dragon Ball's banned, basically all of manga's banned. Hell, most of comic books are banned too. A lot of things are banned when you really think about what counts as nudity even. Does it mean a completely nude figure? Does it mean partially nude? Do exposed ankles count as nudity? You see, that it goes further and further and further because, quite frankly, even describing that term is so vague, a lot of things can fall under it. Which begs the question, if Dragon Ball is censored for nudity, does it mean all of Dragon Ball is censored? Or is Uncle Sam just gonna rip the pages out of your manga? Or your orders from Amazon? Because ordering off of Amazon is a transaction that might fall under KOSA's vague parameters. So maybe you can't even buy something that is NSFW off the internet if KOSA passes. You see, when you start describing the implications, you realize these bills kind of suck.
But wait! There's more!
Because they're not written with very specific parameters in mind. Because they're written by people who don't understand what any of this means.
And most of the people that are making these policies or voting on these policies don't even understand the technology themselves, which is really kind of scary. And
they're simply figureheads of whatever, But even if it doesn't happen, the KOSA bill can still have sweeping impacts across the internet due to a simple concept: money. The infantilization of our modern society is clear. Certain algorithms decrease the reach of certain videos if they include offensive language. That can include slurs, but it can also include saying the word kill. This is due to advertisers feeling uncomfortable putting their ads, and thus potentially their money, alongside offensive media. Like, say, PewDiePie. The adpocalypse of YouTube completely shifted the ballpark on what you could say online. For the worse. Much more for the worse. Because now we can't say certain words online. Like death. That means you can't talk about stuff like sexual assault, dying, or any difficult subject matter without risking your video being demonetized. Or apparently, you can't talk about Godzilla for an adult audience. Yeah, that will also get your video demonetized on YouTube, apparently. I don't know if you know that, but yeah, talking about Godzilla apparently is inappropriate if you're talking about like fighting and monsters and killing, so it's inappropriate for kids because the YouTube AI lists Godzilla content or content about dinosaurs in general as for children. And therefore, if you talk about things like, say, a dinosaur eating another dinosaur or mating patterns, it may be marked up as offensive for children, even though it's scientific material. Certain people who make that kind of content on the regular have pointed this out. This is a bigger thing than you realize. Of course, YouTube doesn't have as restrictive about the word fuck, so I can say fuck all I want, but I talk about complex ideas about life that might get my videos demonetized. It's almost like these companies don't want you talking about heavy topics at all. But again, that would just be silly, because it's not just YouTube or Discord, it's also Visa and MasterCard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on that point about Visa and MasterCard being successful businesses, I think you figured it out, haven't you?
And customers matter to our business?
Maybe is it because that Visa and MasterCard are effectively monopolies? They control 80% of the market? This is classic monopolistic behavior, and yet your testimony here today is you don't want any competition.
If you don't know, Visa and MasterCard often restrict what you can purchase with their services. This includes things such as cannabis sales in the United States, where you can't use Visa to buy cannabis, at least not at a dispensary. That might seem like a small detail, who actually is going to that? But when you take it further, MasterCard and Visa do not want their brand associated with any illicit material. And that gets tricky when it comes to entertainment. I guarantee you know the story. After the organization Collective Shout fought with Visa and MasterCard to get explicit games removed from Steam and itch.io, itch.io took preemptive action to self-censor itself to avoid losing money from Visa and MasterCard removing their services from their games. In that, Visa and MasterCard were saying, if you carry these games, you can't use Visa or MasterCard to make any purchases on your platform, which essentially means itch.io would make no money. Now, Steam kind of worked around this, but itch.io succumbed intensely. They made a statement saying that no games featuring assault or incest or anything like that would be on the platform. So, you know, if Game of Thrones was on itch.io, it would get banned. Yeah, seems kind of odd, doesn't it? But the thing is, a thing like Game of Thrones wouldn't be impacted by this. Just indie projects. The big companies can afford to work around that. The indie guys, little guys, they don't get review. They get a blanket statement and a ban. Simple. Difficult. This story is, of course, old news, almost a year old at this point, as is Texas's incredibly vaguely written anime ban that convinced some stores that selling Dragon Ball might get them charged with CSAM distribution by Texas's current laws, or how many stores have removed all LGBTQIA books off of their shelves after protests from conservative reactionary groups, or how book bans have increased across the country by the thousands. Like, sure, an adult can still buy this stuff, but don't you think it's odd how so many of these books being banned for explicit content appear to be books that discuss systemic issues like racism, sexism, homophobia? Isn't that odd? Isn't it odd how critical race theory was criticized for so long despite it being a college-level course and not present in elementary schools? Isn't it odd how all these groups trying to censor media are always censoring the media that questions the current status quo? And where else is the status quo more threatened than the hodgepodge of identity and conversation that is the internet? Across the net, all different conversations are combined, mixed, and muddied and fused until we get something extraordinary. But publishing is not that. Do you know how many book publishers have reacted to book bans by drastically reducing the numbers of books that are published by marginalized voices? After all, if you don't publish controversial works, they can't get banned, and that does not interfere with your bottom dollar. Seems cynical when you put it that way. But of course, not only are these works popular that are banned, they're also needed. I've mentioned this in the past multiple times, but one of the reasons why the Rocky Horror Picture Show became immensely popular is because it was one of the very few works to center that queer experience back in the 70s that didn't demonize gay people, or I guess, sweet transsexual transvestites from Transylvania. It pushed against conservative values in a way that was shocking, but also very fun. Same with John Waters back in the day. And the only reason kids today don't find these things shocking is because it helped usher in a counterculture that was almost cold by AIDS. Strange how conservatives in the 80s and 90s didn't seem eager to respond to AIDS either, huh? Even Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was a infamously homophobic lawyer who was in fact a secretly gay man. He pushed against people who were trying to get help for AIDS, but in turn died of AIDS himself. And it's funny that AIDS didn't recognize his kindness and values when it was trying to get him, of course. And it's funny too, Cohn's protege respected Cohn all up until it was announced he had AIDS, in which case this small-handed protege didn't want anything to do with Cohn, didn't want to talk to Cohn, was afraid of even touching Cohn's shadow, fearing that he might get sick from whatever Cohn had, and it might give him his AIDS or gayness or whatever it was. Oh well, I'm sure that protege didn't actually go on to do anything important anyway. I'm sure he's no one that's special, and he's especially not in the entirety of the Epstein files either. And decades before all that, you had KOSA's great-grandparent, the Hays Code, a set of rules used to force film studios to turn down any problematic elements from film creatives. All the NSFW stuff like kissing for more than 3 seconds, cut. Interracial couples, cut. Gay people, cut. And oh yeah, there were gay people and black people in film even in the 30s. But don't worry, film execs weren't leaving out every minority from America. They made sure to stay in contact with their friends over in Germany to avoid angering their sensibilities or their leaders' sensibilities, because they all happened to be huge film fans and paid a lot of money for films distributed in Germany. That leader especially, he loved those Disney films and King Kong, By the way, when did the Hays Code come into effect? 1935. What was going on in Germany in 1935? What people don't realize about this era in history is that a lot of filmmakers were including material that was for the time risque and controversial. But to call this counterculture before it could gain momentum, they instilled rules and regulations to prevent film from being controversial or non-family friendly, or just simply rocking the boat too hard. And many films from this era were for a while lost that contained material that would not be on film again until the 70s, including women kissing other women. Yeah, that happened in film back in the 20s and 30s. It's amazing how it took so long after it was initially censored for that to come back into film. And when it did, it attracted more controversy than it did in the 30s. Strange that happens, isn't it? Much later in film, to keep socialism from corrupting our youth, McCarthy's House on Un-American Activity opened up its doors to search for proof of hidden commies in Hollywood. And thankfully, American patriot and has-been actor Ronald Reagan was there to rat out all of his friends to this committee. Reagan would go on to be president, where he got to blissfully ignore the AIDS epidemic and instill absurd minimum sentencing for first-time offenders of marijuana possession in the inner cities. Do you see a pattern yet? Nothing I said before was an accident. It was all included, and you're smart. You can put it together, I'm sure. Anyway, what was the point with all this? Oh yeah, simple. KOSA isn't something new. It's just an echo of the same bullshit censorship that hurt us in the past. For decades now. These policies never improve anything, but they only make things worse, especially in an era where information is freely communicated. But a lot of people will tell you to relax about it, except no, you really shouldn't relax about it, especially because these resources are, by and large, extremely popular. The things that KOSA wants to censor, they're used for a reason, and they're going to be labeled as NSFW not because they're actually inappropriate, but because they push against sensibilities of what is acceptable. More and more often, you hear the word woke applied to any material that accurately reflects history or accurately reflects reality. There was pushback against a dinosaur documentary. Yeah, a dinosaur documentary for incorporating recent discoveries about dinosaurs into its material. But because it wasn't as badass as Jurassic Park, which I remind you is a work of fiction, people online argued it was quote-unquote woke. Yeah, that was woke, apparently. A T-Rex that looks like a real T-Rex. That's woke. Yeah. You see how stupid it all sounds? And before all that, the buzzword, of course, was satanic. The famous satanic panic of the 80s involved us looking at rock music and saying, oh, it's satanic, it's the devil's work. Or Dungeons & Dragons and going, oh, it's the devil's work, it's going to bring you to hell. And of course, this led to a hysteria that convinced people that Satan worshippers were slaughtering thousands in secret, under your nose even, and just no one knew about it. There was no police reports filed because that's how big a grip they had. And if you never heard about it, that's because the Satanists got into the TV stations and kept the news from coming out, and they're all in on it except for you. And that led to the West Memphis 3. The West Memphis 3 were 3 teenagers falsely accused of a series of brutal murders. There was no evidence for it, but one of the kids confessed to the crimes after extensive interviews by the police. Borderline torture, one might say. There was no physical evidence, and in fact, evidence would later come forward, proving that the police accidentally destroyed material evidence that would have exonerated all 3 of them. It took decades for them to get out of jail, and even then, even though there was no evidence that they did a single thing wrong, or even in the locations of the crimes, when it happened. In fact, evidence pointed to the opposite. There was no physical way they could have possibly committed these crimes. And this evidence was tossed out because the kids looked scary, because they were goth and punks. Yeah, that's the reality of it. It was a witch trial. They believed these kids did the crime because they looked intimidating. But there was no evidence for it, but they had to be Satan worshippers because they looked like Satan worshippers. And that was all the evidence the town needed. You see how misinformation can be really dangerous if you have no alternative there? KOSA is an echo chamber. The satanic panic is an echo chamber where stupid ideas can bubble up and cause material harm, not only to artists, but to individuals. And by removing access to resources that could teach people correct information, that's dangerous. These resources help. The West Memphis 3 would never be released if there wasn't an outcry against their arrest in the first place. What hope would they have if all the resources were deemed NSFW because it showed crime scene footage, because that's not safe. That's not safe for work, but it's accurate information you need to know. But what if you couldn't access it without getting your ID somewhere? What if you had to log in to access this information? Now the government knows you're looking at this information and can track you. Scary, isn't it? But on a more general nature, because you're probably not gonna solve a true crime, but you will watch movies. And let's be honest, a lot of people prefer the woke stuff over the non-woke stuff. Case in point, who saw Sinners? Raise your hand if you saw Sinners. Who saw Melania? Yeah, I thought so. It's arguable that many conservative films don't reach a larger audience, in part because they're very niche stories, in part also because they're sometimes not really good. I mean, look at the Daily Wire's body of work. The animated series Mr. Bircham, for example, did not reconnect with its target conservative audience, but a lot of yaoi shippers loved it because of how much they wanted to clown on it. And these are works of more overtly conservative media that are not good. Obviously not. But what you don't realize is that the majority of Hollywood is conservative. Yeah, no, they always want to say, oh, it's the wokes over there, but that's the same thing as Satanic Panic. That's not really the case. By and large, Hollywood is a conservative institution, still working with the mindset of the Hays Code to present material that maximizes profit over pushing an agenda. Because after all, most films do not challenge the status quo, and the ones that do, like say your Cronenbergs, your Wachowskis, your Spike Lees, they either don't get mainstream attention for all their films or have to hide instrumental truths in stories that film execs won't turn a second eye at. The Matrix, for example, was deemed as wild and kooky sci-fi, and in turn, they didn't notice the subversive messaging of accepting the red pill to break through of the programming of the modern day, a system that monitors and manipulates you at all sides. Mainstream media, though, wants what KOSA is offering for the internet, because it turns the internet into a regulated safe place for corporate interests, much like how film is made for corporate interests. What makes the most profit? What doesn't rock the boat too much? And if a filmmaker does rock the boat, they often don't have much of a career in mainstream cinema. Again, look at Spike Lee, a filmmaker who's had to fight to get funding for all of his films. And while Spike Lee isn't the most controversial filmmaker of all time, a lot of his films are controversial for preaching certain powerful messages. And I think Spike Lee's films, some of them, not all of them, are some of the best films of all time. But I'm sure Black Klansman, Malcolm X, Do the Right Thing, all encountered massive backlash behind the scenes we probably never heard of, just to get funding. It's far easier to greenlight something safe than it is something dangerous, but people are increasingly not accepting that. To steal back subversive language from a certain right-wing group, people are taking that red pill, and they are seeing the artifice of our matrix for what it is. A bunch of people who want to control us through media. And that includes the internet. They'd rather us consume AI slop than consume media that challenges our worldview. They'd rather us be complacent with the familiar than encounter the alien, and in turn grow from the experience, to allow it to influence our minds and overtake us with new, fantastic ideas that push us to new territory, to new heights. They don't want that, because it's far easier to manipulate a populace already consumed with the bug of consumerism than it is to spread ideas through a populace that questions everything in the best possible way. KOSA is, simply put, designed to control you. All of these restrictions are designed to control you or track you. And conservatives don't want what KOSA wants either. Don't get me wrong, because as you saw with recent elections, victory breaks all momentum your grift can possibly bring. A lot of you grifters online who are criticized, your numbers are down, right? Because no one on your side has anything left to get upset about. They're complacent, and thus more willing to bend to corporate interests. KOSA would totally destroy your grift.
December was like the most difficult month of the 10 years that I've been doing all of this. The channel stumbled when culture war topics died. If you look, like I've spent the last like 3 months going through the analytics. The culture war content is dead.
Yep.
Like if you go and look at all the channels that were producing videos at the same time I was over the last year, right? We were all killing it. Just the whole space is dead now. you know, a lot of these like mid-tier culture war channels, they're all dead.
Yeah.
But the whole space is just not what it used to be. This is a channel like last year, this time was gaining 40,000 subscribers a month, 40, 13,000, 40,000. And look at this entire year. I mean, don't, like, if you want to question me on anything, there's a lot of things I'm not an expert on, but like analytics and YouTube, I'm very good at.
I believe him.
And forget about your sexy ladies in video games. The Hays Code very famously forbade women from showing too much skin. That joke about ankles with nudity at the beginning of this whole thing, it's not a joke that happened during the Hays Code. So if the Hays Code, modern Hays Code, gets passed, it's a possibility that down the line, you might not be able to have exposed ankles in your video games. Or, for that matter, women at all in anything. So what can we do? It seems hopeless, right? Well, call your senators. Make noise. I am ultimately against the censorship of media in all forms, but there are people out there more familiar with the proper legal challenges needed to fight bills like KOSA that can push against this. But it's not just KOSA, because KOSA is just one factor. There are book bans happening in your state. Protest them. Fight them. They are always done in the shadows because if people actually know what's going on, they fight back. Bans happen because everyone else stays silent. If you protest, if you go to these, and there could be some in your area right now to argue we should keep these books that are controversial on shelves, that goes a long way. Because yes, the internet may survive KOSA, but physical media might not. To this day, an increasingly digitized world has turned archives off of physical libraries and into digital ones. We constantly have sites like the Internet Archive under attack, under lawsuits, under pressure, designed to remove this necessary element of internet information from us, to keep us from accessing massive amounts of archive data. You might not use it often, but those who need to use it do. And those who need to use it will then communicate what's there to you, creating an ecosystem that continually spreads information that's valuable. Even if you don't use these resources yourself, these resources are essential to giving you good information that is accurate and informative and compelling. Because at the end of the day, why would anyone want this gone? Simply put, to better control you. Without accurate information, you are susceptible. Without history, you forget what paths happened in the past that led us to dangerous presents. Because they can tell you otherwise. Always keep a straight eye forward. Always continually look to the truth. Always pursue that which is meaningful in this world. Because if you do not, you will allow yourself to succumb to misinformation, to a controlling system of power that restricts you. This bill is just one tentacle of the multi-tendrilled entity that is censorship and the dangers therein. And I will always oppose censorship of any kind. You should too.